Welcome to Martial Wisdom. Here you can listen to conversations on all kinds of topics related to martial arts. Should you go physical? We will discuss different timings and their advantages and dangers. Joining me in this conversation is Remy Helgesen. Before we get started, please consider supporting this podcast by liking and sharing it. Also consider joining the Spirit Aikido online program, which currently has 230 videos. I've recently added several videos which talk about the exact topic that we're talking about today, which is taking preemptive action to protect yourself, and how we can train that in the dojo. Another option is to contribute any amount you like through the PayPal tip jar. Even small contributions are greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this episode. Now, on with the discussion. Welcome back to Modern Aikidoist podcast and Martial Wisdom. I have my friend Remy Helgesen back on the show. I've been very excited about this episode. We're going to talk about the timings and when to make the decision to go hands-on. And so welcome back, Remy, and I can't wait to get started.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward as well.
It's a common understanding that the Japanese talk about the timing of attack. And I want to frame this discussion for self-defense, but also in terms of these ways of describing the timings of attack. Now, I was described these many, many years ago that there were three of them, and there were actually four. And those three being go no sen, sen, and sen no sen, or at least those were the terms that were taught to me. And there's always a caution when it comes to these Japanese terms that there are different interpretations of the meanings of these terms. But just to define them going on, and I know there's always dispute and people saying it means this or it means that and whatnot. And that's kind of why we want to dig into this. But as it was explained to me, go no sen was a responsive action. And that is your attacker makes a move towards you. They execute their attack. You either block or dodge. And then in the next beat, you counter whatever it was that they did. And I think that this describes very closely how most Aikido is practiced. Uke throws a punch or some kind of a strike or a grab, and then in the next beat, Nage counters with their technique. Sen is a simultaneous attack where both, I guess, Uke and Nage, or both opponents, attack at the exact same moment. Sometimes this results in a mutual death, or if one of the fighters steps offline, the attack that's coming into them misses, and they succeed in connecting with their attack. And these are very common to kendo and a lot of the sword arts, kenjutsu, whatnot. Go no sen is when an opponent reads his attacker's intention, where you can see the intention to attack. You can watch as they start to decide and their body is about to move or it's starting to move, and you intercept and attack in that moment before they really get their attack motion going. So it's a kind of preemptive, but I don't think preemptive is the right word. I think it's a interception. And I think this is where Bruce Lee's he really wanted to take his art into being that interception concept. And he even named Jeet Kune Do the way of the intercepting fist. And so the idea of intercepting an attack before it really starts to form, I think, is solid in terms of strategy. And so as a former sport fighter, these three definitions are very prominent. I mean, I've experienced all of these ad nauseum so many times that I can't even count them. The one that's the most difficult is the sen no sen. It takes a great deal of skill to read an opponent and be able to intercept them. It takes not only the reading, but also the speed, decision and execution speed in order to intercept them. If you're not quick, you're probably going to miss it. And I would classify a fighter who uses this technique as what we call a counter puncher. They tend to take advantage of that strike or the intention to strike, and they tend to use either sen no sen or sen, where they are so skilled at reading attacks that they know exactly how to move to evade their enemy's attack, and they attack at the same moment or just before. Now, that frames these timings. And I'll get to the fourth one in a minute, but the reason I wanted to have Remy on is that there's, I think, a great danger in using Go-no-sen, which is the reactive or responsive approach when it comes to actual violence. And as somebody who works professionally in security, I think that would you agree that you really don't want to wait until somebody is attacking you to start to take action?
No, you want to be way ahead of that, because sometimes that's could be a little bit too late, and it could be, a little bit too much damage and receiving, and then you just don't have time to block sometimes.
Right.
So you want to be preemptive, or you want to stop something before it happens if you can read it.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the best defense of Go-no-sen, or the reactive part, which is, it's easy to remain in the moral clear or in the legal clear by saying, I was attacked first, I didn't throw the first punch, or I didn't take the first move, I didn't act aggressively. It's pretty morally defensible. It's easy to explain it that way, but I think it's also the strategically most dangerous and vulnerable, because you can misread the attack, you can move a little too late. A lot of these dangers come up when you are reacting, and the military has the mantra, action beats reaction, and I think that describes the danger of counting on the perfectly timed reaction and the perfectly chosen reaction, because if either of those are wrong or a little off, you could be in real danger.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a question of distance as well, though. If you're close enough, you won't have time to put your hands up. Whether it's just a haymaker or a headbutt or whatever, it's really hard to stop a headbutt from this distance right here. But if we got like almost like an arm reach of a distance, you can still like feel the guy about to swing maybe, and you have time to like retract a little bit, and then you counter. But that's all like relatively speaking. So I'm not really too fan of the whole reaction thing. You should better to train to be a little bit more ahead of that.
Sure. And that's why, if we looked at this on a sliding scale or on a spectrum, the more you go towards preemption, the safer you are. But you also get into that, you need to have very good judgment and make sure that you are reading somebody correctly, and not just attacking somebody who's being a loudmouth, but who you sincerely believe is about to actually go hands-on or to commit to a physical attack. And I guess this is where the fourth timing comes in. And that is called sensen no sen. Now, this is something that I got a bit confused by back when I learned about these timings, and I wasn't certain that sen no sen and sensen no sen were different, but they are different as I understand it. And sensen no sen was described to me as being, you read an opponent and their intention to attack. Basically, you spot an aggressive person who's showing all the body language of being physically aggressive, and you take some kind of action which preempts them or provokes them into executing the physical attack that they already had in mind. So basically, this is the intercepting of the intention, taking to a really fine level, like a very, I would say this is almost, I don't know, this would be probably one of the most difficult things to execute, because you not only have to spot somebody that's right on that edge of taking action, but now you're going to provoke them, and hoping that they respond in a way that you are anticipating, so you can deal with it, with their attack. So this is the one that I can see fitting really well to kendo or kenjutsu or competitive sword arts, or even just any competitive boxer. If you try to and I guess maybe the best term to use here would be to bait somebody or to lure them into a particular attack, because then you can basically set a trap for them, and when they jump on it, you act. And oftentimes when I was competing, I would do that by leaving a particular target open. If I could sense that there was a particular target my opponent really liked, I'd kind of open it a little bit to try to lure them in. And since I knew what they were about to do or had a good idea, I could have a counter ready. Again, this is that counter puncher kind of approach. And, having tried many different approaches, the counter puncher is effective, but takes some really good skill to be able to do well. And I think there's still a bit of a danger here, but I'd much rather lure somebody into an attack that I was ready for than wait for it to happen and hope I respond correctly, like the Gono-sen approach. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think you got to go with the gut feeling, and with enough experience, like you'll feel somebody out, whether they're about to attack you or just being verbal. And sometimes it's just a matter of like, are you willing to accept this behavior of that person or not? Like when you work, for example, in the doors as a bouncer, you have someone mouthing off, which is every night, but but that's standard. But then you have people being very disrespectful, and maybe they're harassing other guests, and they're being aggressive towards the staff and whatever. And you got to make a decision, like, are you going to accept that or not? And is this person capable, or is the intent there for harming someone very soon? So I think the gut feeling will be, you got to trust your gut feeling. And then sometimes it's just like, you got to stop it yourself, unless, this guy's about to throw a punch or whatever, and you want to intercept. Sometimes you just go over to that person and be like, you need to F off right now, or something bad might happen to you. And that's a clear message to that person, like, we don't accept that behavior over here. And that also gives him the alternative to walk away or to escalate it. So what I'm trying to do is de-escalate it by setting boundaries. But also, I'm telling this person that if he keeps going, then he will have consequences for that. So, and if he chooses then to turn it up a couple levels, then you might just have to, take him down or push him backwards until he comes back with some sort of attack, and then you're already there.
I think a lot of this, I'm really glad you described this way, because of all the martial artists that I've met, most of us tend to get hyper focused into the moment the punch starts to swing, and then what do I do in that next second? Like we're so interested in the technical, what goes on there from a technical level. What you've described is let's look at the setup and let's look at the whole interaction. And I think in looking at it that way, we can see the sensen no sen, which is you read the intention as you go over to somebody. You see that they're perhaps behaving erratically or starting to cause a disturbance. You intercept at that point, you read the intention, and you get them either through your exchange for them to back down or behave themselves or leave, or to escalate. When they escalate, that basically is your indicator that, all right, this isn't just going to end peacefully. I have to move to some type of control and get them out of here. And now you may not choose to act at that exact moment where you realize it, but from there you'd be setting up, okay, how am I going to do this in the smoothest, least destructive way to the club, to the guests, to even to the person who's disturbing the place.
Exactly.
I can see how that fits in a kind of a broader scale. And I think that that's where we martial artists, we might not be, door people or bouncers, but an exchange like that is something that civilians can easily get into, whether it's out in public, or they're in their own home, they're in some place where they have to say, hey, there's a disturbance going on, I'm part of it, or maybe an innocent person's part of it, and they may need to help somebody who's getting intimidated, bullied, harassed, whatever. And so an exchange like what you're talking about is not unusual. I would say unusual, but it'd be something that would be very common for a normal person to get into.
Definitely. I mean, it's all about the communication before a conflict happens, or during a conflict, and you're really trying to de-escalate it. But sometimes it's just not enough with verbal de-escalation, and just reading the situation out, setting boundaries, and having the tools to stop a potential violent person.
Right. There was an interview that was back in, I think it was 1957, and this was published in Aikido Journal. It was an interview of O-sensei, and his statement. He said, and I want to read this verbatim, which I don't usually do, but this is quite profound, and it says a number of things. O-sensei says, in Aikido, there is absolutely no attack. To attack means that the spirit has already lost. We adhere to the principle of absolute non-resistance. That is to say, we do not oppose the attacker. Thus, there is no opponent in Aikido. The victory in Aikido is Masakatsu Agatsu. Since you win over everything in accordance with the mission of heaven, you possess absolute strength. And the interviewer responds and says, does that mean Go-no-sen, which is the defensive attack? And O-sensei says, surprisingly, absolutely not. It's not a question of either sensen-no-sen or sen-no-sen. If I were to try to verbalize it, I would say that you control your opponent without trying to control him. That is the state of continuous victory. There isn't any question of winning over or losing to an opponent. In this sense, there is no opponent in Aikido. Even if you have an opponent, he becomes part of you, a partner you control only. I think, firstly, this is a testament to when O-sensei spoke, he was very cryptic and it was not clear, because you can read 10 different ideologies into his statements. But I think, and of course, there's always the translation issue of how is this translated? We need a little bit of latitude for that just to discuss it. But it's this last sentence that really struck me, which was, even if you have an opponent. So it's even O-sensei admits, if somebody is earnestly trying to harm you, I'd say that's what he's probably calling an opponent. And then he says he becomes a part of you. That is more cryptic. I don't really get it. But here's where it really lands, is a partner you control only. And that means that rather than having the mentality to destroy them or harm them or cause them injury or kill them, you just control their body. And again, this is where I think a bouncer, security people, they understand the concept of apprehension, of taking away somebody's physical means of causing harm in a way that's not destructive to them. What do you think of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think also you can read into those quotes there in many ways, but it leaves room for a lot of different people's opinions and philosophies.
Sure.
But it's definitely trying to control people's minds and in physical altercations, their bodies.
Sure.
When they try to be threatening and they try to pose a threat, you feel them out. You send a message back. We don't really care for your attitude, and if they don't really comprehend that phase, and they want to take it to the next phase, which is causing physical harm to anyone, then you try to deal with that in the best way possible. I mean, it's whether they're attacking you physically or you're feeling their intention, they're about to do something. You can look upon that as control in both ways. You're not really attacking them; they're attacking you mentally first before they're attacking you physically. So you're just intercepting before they get to that next phase.
Sure. Yeah, and I love the term intercepting, because it's so descriptive of the exchange that's going on there. It's a complex interaction or conversation, and taking that preemptive motion or action, I think is crucial. You avoid so much danger that way. It's by percentage so much safer. And I guess that's where that first sentence that O-sensei said, in Aikido, there is absolutely no attack. And this is where, since I don't speak Japanese, maybe there's a different word that there's more nuance to the word attack. But for me, attack can mean either an action that's meant to cause physical destruction, which I think most people would probably say at first blush, that makes sense. The other one is, and this is how I view it, if somebody was being disruptive and I had to put my hands on them first without causing them harm, somebody could say that that's choosing to attack. But
exactly,
I don't think it necessarily is. And within what his statement, an attack, if without the intention to do harm, is it still an attack? If you wrapped up somebody who was being physically aggressive in your bar, pin their arms down so they had no way to actually harm anybody, and haul them out, would what you did be considered an attack? In my opinion, I don't think it would be. And that, therefore, if we isolate, okay, and that's why I use the term take action or go hands-on, does not necessarily mean punch them in the throat or send them to the hospital. It means control their body, take away their ability to cause harm or destruction, and that's how you take care of that problem. And so I think that the distortion of calling such an action an attack, I think, is a problem, and it actually creates a situation where a martial artist or a practitioner would say, I'm not going to take any physical motion until I'm attacked. And I think that's dangerous.
I think that's very naive. And I think a lot of Aikido people have that mind state that you're supposed to wait for someone to attack. It tells me they never been into any situations where they had to defend themselves, or they never learned from it. Like 90% of what you do, especially when you're working like the nightclubs and stuff, is just dealing with people, reading situations, being aware and reading people's intentions, and dealing with it verbally and physically before it escalates, and explaining that to someone that must see another guy punch you before you defend yourself is very, it's a very ignorant conversation.
Sure.
Because and sometimes it could be too late also. Like if he clocks you in a good spot, and and then his buddies jumps in and it gets all rowdy, it's a little bit too late. You're not supposed to wait for someone to hit you and then you react. But that does happen. Like sometimes that does happen. You're not always 100% aware. You're not always in your full center, and you're reading everything perfectly. It does happen. I've received a couple of those before. Also got head butted, I've got clocked from the side, from the back, it does happen. But you do train to avoid situations like that. You do train to keep center and to keep that awareness, though, for that not to happen.
Absolutely. And I want to just jump back a little bit, because there's a concept here, and I really liked you brought up the setting the boundaries, establishing a boundary. And this comes into, I guess, more of a larger scale issue, which is that if you allow a behavior, either in your case in your club, or for any normal person in your house or around you, if you allow a behavior that's intrusive upon you, you're going to get more of that behavior. It's not going to just stop and go away.
Exactly.
It's usually when people start to infringe upon others and they don't receive any resistance, those people will at very least continue what they're doing, if not say, maybe I can take this a little farther. And this is
unfortunately a lot of humans are like that.
Yep.
And it starts from kindergarten. It's pushing boundaries, and it's you have work scenarios where people are being like halfway bullied, or you always have people that's trying to like climb the ladder and stepping on other, on their colleagues and on other people. And it's definitely about setting boundaries. And in a nightclub, if you allowed a certain attitude to take over, it's just going to like rub off on everybody. That generates the energy around there. And if you let in a couple of troublemakers, suddenly, that energy just rubs off, and you'll have somebody at the other side of the nightclub now. Suddenly, they start arguing a little bit, and that rubs off to the other side of the room, and then you have yourself a little scenario going on.
Sure.
So yeah,
Well, and
super
I
important to
just
set
looking
boundaries.
at it from and I totally agree with you, and I've seen that same thing go on many different levels, and it comes down to toxic people or toxic behavior, and it will spread, and it somehow acts like a magnet where it draws in more toxic people and more toxic behavior.
Or it just reveals that people are toxic. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah, I generally believe mostly people are good, but there are some evil people out there, and there are some good people that just make some mistakes. In fact, I remember an incident I had many, many years ago, and this was a guy this is a friend of mine. He was at my house having a party. He gets drunk, and he just decides, I want to fight. And I was like, this dude is big. He starts fighting, and nobody else wanted to. Everybody else was having a good time, having a drink, and he just had that, that alcohol induced, I want to fight something or somebody, and he was trying to find somebody to do it. Of course, it was my house, so I felt like I needed to go talk to him, and I mean, I tried everything to calm him down and to turn the train that was headed down the destroy my kitchen sort of direction, and I was finally able to do it. Talking him down, but it took me probably half an hour to do it. Now, I'm glad that I decided to do it that way than to try to go physical on him and have it turn into, two bulls in a china shop. But I also had a boundary there to say, no, I don't want you fighting in my house. That's not acceptable. And it turns, I needed to leave him a way out. So I basically just said, all right, let's walk out front and let's talk. And I basically told him, if you really want to hit me, you can hit me, but I'm not going to fight you. And he, I guess, didn't find that was very appealing. And so he kind of just walked it off around the block a couple of times, and that was it. But, I was, and this was even before I studied Aikido and had, decent hand to hand or, empty hand skills. But regardless, he was big and strong enough. I mean, he worked at a concrete factory. And so, I mean, it would have been a tangle. I mean, he was very physically capable. And it's just one of those things where, I always knew every moment, like this could go physical any second, any moment here, he could just decide, all right, I'm done talking, I want to go, because that's where his energy was. But, I to this day, I count myself lucky that I was able to kind of talk him down. And of course, since we were friends, I don't think he really wanted to hit me. He just wanted to get into a fight, and was able to call him on that. But again, there was that boundary set of, you're not going to get into a fight in my house. Like that's, but I didn't pose that to him in an adversarial way. And that was challenging, I would say, to have to try to get that verbal back and forth. Now, if I was a bouncer and that was a club, I don't think I would have sat there for half an hour trying to talk him out. It would have been, we would have hauled him out, because it just didn't appear to be calming down. It just basically held at an even level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like you don't always have that much time neither to like talk to people for like
Yep.
especially inside. Like you got to move around, you got different stuff going on. Suddenly there's somebody that needs help somewhere or whatever. So you don't have that much time to talk people down, especially inside the club.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, people project a lot of their inner selves when they drink. They go through the 9 to 5, and they're not always that happy and whatever, and suddenly they drink too much alcohol, and this guy wants to fight everyone or take something out, that he's been carrying inside for a
Mhm.
long time. And yeah, that's, I
Well,
think, especially, yeah,
go ahead. Keep going. Sorry.
I was just about to say, I think, especially Scandinavian drinking culture needs to tone down a little bit. Like people drink like crazy over here, and but they do everywhere though. But it's just
Mhm.
like they just get so hammered here.
Right.
Um, Need to drink a little bit less.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, lesson for anybody, we're especially where young men are drinking alcohol, that's where the troubles are, the greatest chance of there being a physical problem.
And drugs.
And
And
drugs.
that's a different topic for like de-escalating someone who's very high on drugs.
Mhm.
Like talking to him verbally is sometimes very difficult,
Mhm.
because their whole cognitive their whole brain is in a whole different mind state. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, and this is, I guess, where I was headed with this, which is the intent. And I think this even is covered in Osensei's quote um, about the to attack means that the spirit has already lost. That says to me, when you decide to act out of anger or rage, and that is an attack. Whereas if you move to control somebody's body to make sure that they are not physically, they're showing their intention to harm you, but you take away their ability to harm you and do it in a as benevolent way as you can. To me, that is what accurately describes what he was talking about. I could be wrong, but to me, it's at least a morally defensible and even practical way to approach this. Because if your mind is calm and you're not acting out of anger or rage, you've got a better chance of making good decisions, keeping a cool head, and doing what needs to be done to protect yourself and others. You act out of rage and anger, and now that's when mistakes get made.
I agree. And I also believe it is self-defense when someone has the intent to cause harm on you, and you feel that person out and you react before they have the chance to do that. In some people's eyes, they might say that you're being the active one, but you're really being the proactive one, because you're sensing a situation before it happens.
Right.
And that sometimes is a little bit difficult to explain to at least certain Aikido people. They just haven't been clocked in their face before, and you just don't want to feel that happen again. So yeah, it's that self-defense.
Yeah, that's true. And this is something that I've noticed, not only the naivety of never having experienced it, but also watching others, especially through video, because we have a lot of video examples. It is very hard to read somebody's intention through a video of their behavior. And a lot of these self-defense or these attack situations, we don't often see the lead up to what happened. Like somebody gets their cell phone and they get a little picture of somebody getting punched or grabbed or a little fight. You don't get the 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes that set all of that up to say, if you're going to go second guess somebody's ability to read a situation or read a person, they read a lot more than you can read watching that video. Even if the video did include it, oftentimes it's hard to pick up on reading somebody's intention through a small video. But if you're there, you can really, if you know what you're looking for, it can be like a billboard standing in your face saying this guy is trouble. And to second guess somebody's response by saying, well, they probably didn't mean to do you harm. Well, how you can't know that by watching a little video.
Exactly.
You might if they're bold enough with their words and their actions, but oftentimes it's very difficult, if not impossible.
Oh yeah. And our like some of the challenges with when you're working in public is that everyone has a phone and they always film, and they tend to take out the camera right after a physical situation has happened, so they catch the second half of a situation.
Right.
And then they don't get to see that this person that's being held down right now, right before that, he spit or he took a bottle and swing that at this other guy or whatever. So they only catch the second half, and you can't really see what happened in that situation unless you see the whole video footage of it. Like I had a situation, I think it was a week ago. This guy, he was too drunk, and he was hanging outside of the club, and he was being a nice guy, like a little bit irritating, like he was talking a lot of smack, but his intent wasn't to be, to attack us. Then he walks around the corner, and then he comes back, and it's all twitchy, and his fingers is all like playing the piano, and he's like really quick in his head movement. So obviously he had a little fix around the corner, and probably something up his nose or whatever, and he went all ape shit, and he picked up our fences and started just slamming them. and then he just runs towards me.
Okay.
So yeah, and he ended up on the ground, and he he didn't, I don't want to say too much, but he we got control of him, and in a way or another, and he actually apologized afterwards. But that's how quickly it could change, though.
Yeah.
I don't have time to reevaluate his mental mind state, his psychological background or whatever. When he just runs at you, then you just have to react.
Mm-hmm. You know, a couple of months ago, I had a friend of mine who's a police officer, and he came in to work on some grappling with my students and I, and we were wrapping up the session. And he said, does anybody have any questions? And one of my students asked him, he said, have you ever dealt with a knife attack? And he said, yeah, probably, 6, 7, 8 times or something like that. But he said, it never looks like, and he held a knife out, sort of like you see a typical knife defense in Aikido, where the knife attacker's holding the knife kind of like a rapier, in front of them, and he lunges it. He said, it never looks anywhere near like that. It says how it went in every one of my cases. I would see somebody reach for their knife, their elbow would go back, and their hand would go to their belt, and I would come in and grab them and dump them and take the knife away. Says it worked brilliantly every time. I was never in any danger. But when he described that, these timings came into play. I think he was using that sen no sen, which is he saw the aggressive intention. He started to see the motion, and that instant he just pounced on him. And to me, the Aikido and the knife was my first big and probably biggest crisis of faith with how Aikido tends to practice and study dealing with the knife. And what he described to me was the very best way to deal with a deadly weapon is you do it before that thing. You do not use a go no sen approach with it. That would be an epic disaster.
Yeah.
And to say, he was very comfortable with it. Of course, again, like you talked about earlier about range, he, as a police officer, always makes sure when he's talking to somebody, he gets close enough to them that if they do reach for a weapon, he's on them in a heartbeat. And that's something that a civilian might not be as comfortable with, but we can see the tactical application of that, especially when, he likes to step off to one side and not be face to face with somebody, just as a habit. And that kind of flank position is a superior position to jump somebody if they do decide to go for a weapon. And being experienced, he knows what a weapon draw looks like. And he also, as a police officer, he has the authority to back up his judgment in terms of, okay, this is bad news. But if you think about, even, I'm sure you don't have a law enforcement type authority, but if you see somebody going for their belt, you're not going to wait around for that thing to come out or figure out what comes out of the belt. It's time to act. And I think that's another thing that came to me with all these timings about how important it is for that preemptive action.
It's really important. It's like a bouncer
life
has
or death
almost
important.
Exactly, and a bouncer has almost the same authority as a civilian. It's basically a civilian. You do have a little bit more, like, you're put in a position where you're more righteous in forms of explaining a situation, maybe, but you're basically working on the same regulations as a civilian guy. It's when it comes to like knives and stuff like that, especially in Aikido, it's knives are really, really hard to deal with if they're pulled, if they're drawn, and the guy is trying to stab you or cut you. Really hard to take the knife away. So the Aikido forms is I've stopped training that for a long time ago, because I just don't find it. I don't see, like, it's good for training range sometimes, but at the same time, it's such a serious training situation that I don't want to be playing around with it too much, because like the your cop friend said, like, he sees the patterns in forms of how they pull and draw, and you want to stop it before he gets it out. Like, whether he wants to threaten you with it or he wants to actually kill you, it's you don't know that before the knife is out and he's moving.
Right.
And when the knife is out and the guy is actually moving towards you and he wants to cut you or stab you and you don't have a weapon yourself, that's a really bad situation. And if you have the illusion that you can take somebody's knife away when he's actually coming towards you, you will unfortunately end up in a bad situation.
Pretty close to suicide.
Regardless. Yeah. So there's no illusions regarding knives,
right?
With me.
And so. I think, you know, with weapons, you know, and I was always taught that weapons are like a multiplier. They highlight the problems, and I think that this knife, what we're talking about here with the knife, highlights the Gono-sen problem. It's not really any different from somebody swinging a punch at you or getting a hold of you and you know, starting their attack. It's always better to intercept it earlier. In fact, even with grabs, I've noticed, and I mean, the way I was brought up in my Aikido was pretty martially sound, but even we still did this, which is, all right, somebody grabs you and now you start to respond and the attacker doesn't really do anything more. And I came to realize that's a decent way to start with raw beginners. You don't want to overwhelm them with what a typical grab would be. And the defense is saying, well, grabs don't happen in real life. Well, they don't happen in a boxing match, but they certainly do happen in real life.
Oh, yeah.
But they're part of an ongoing, relentless, dynamic attack. It's not just a static, I'm going to grab you. It's I'm going to grab and start punching, or grab and start ragging your body around. And that's where, you know, allowing them to get the grab is, now you're behind the ball. Now you're in that Gono-sen type timing, and that's dangerous. Now, the way to take that danger away is to make sure your attacker just grabs you and then stops, and then you get to do what you want to do. And that's the kind of a practice that, to me, is dangerous, because you're leading practitioners into thinking, oh, well, this is okay. It's okay if I let somebody grab me. It's okay because I know what to do. I have my pattern responses. But over time, I think that starts to degrade practice when practitioners don't graduate out of that beginner level into, I got to keep somebody's hands off me. I am not going to let them grab me. You know, I need to intercept this ahead of time. And that's going to be that, you know, I guess I would call it sen, for example, like you grab at me and I do an arm drag. Really, I'm attacking as you're attacking. So I would qualify that into that mutual action type zone.
Yeah.
To me, that's about as low down the reaction scale as I ever want to get.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, it's like grabs can be vicious. Like, you don't want to be grabbed and held, you know, and you don't want to be stuck trying to do a Nikyo and the guy has like a lumberjack wrists or whatever, and you can't really get that Nikyo to work. And sooner or later, he's gonna either, you know, punch or do something else. So you don't want to be wasting time. So when you get grabbed, you want to, first of all, you don't want to get grabbed. But usually when I get grabbed, if they try to grab and like shake or whatever, like I hit him with the atami, whether it's a little atami on the nuts real quick. Nobody sees that. He lets go. I move on to the back. I take control. If he's still going ape shit, I sweep him and try and take him down. I try not to fight the grabs,
right?
Because it's a waste of time. And I mean, if it's room for a Rokyo and then you move into a Nikyo, I've done that before, but it's just like statistically, it's hard technique to pull off in those situations. But if you can, like, theoretically, Aikido people would like to explain this with taking the center before he grabs, and then you move into a technique. But it just goes so quickly, you just don't have time to do a lot of moves.
Right.
So, but I like the way you explained the knife situation in forms of reacting, you know, being proactive before the attack happens. Same with punches. So if the guy is about to pull a knife, you react before he gets it out and try to get control of the situation. The same with the guy about to punch you. It just leaves a lot of discussion for people, because some people just don't see or feel when a guy is has the intention to actually attack you. So but that's basically self-defense, and that's high level of self-defense. Highest level is obviously not being in a situation. first and foremost, but when you do end up there, that you can react before the guy actually attacks you. Yeah.
It's such a, you talk about that as I think about, that the timing. And there's one element of timing, and this is just a purely physical part, which is not so much about moving quickly or moving fast or trying to move fast, but moving at the right moment. And when you do that, you don't need to move fast. I guess sudden might be the best word, to go from you're ready, you're in that zanshin kind of state where your body is ready to move. You're not on your heels and straight legged and whatnot. And it's kind of like having a bowstring pulled back and it's taut, and all you need to do is release it and it just suddenly goes. And I think as I've tried to work on my timing, and the best way to work on timing is to slow down a bit. Don't go at full speed and try to just rush your way through it. To really get good timing, kind of like practicing music, you need to practice slower and thorough, and know exactly when you move, and when you move, to not rush, to not try to, because when you rush, then you tend to lose your posture, your balance, things like that. But to be able to move suddenly, kind of like, I'll describe this like when you flip on a light switch, you start to move the switch up and up and up, and suddenly the light is just on. And to be able to move your body in that way. And that's why, as I watch, a lot of Aikido demonstrations and people showing technique, and I watch their body movement, I notice a lot of Aikidoka move sluggishly. Like they don't have that, it's not fast movement, but just the ability to move with that sudden, at the right time, on posture, move real crisp and solid. That's pretty rare. And I think if you practice Gono-sen all the time, it's going to start to create in you sluggish footwork and sluggish movement. Whereas if you have to train with Sen, where you have to move simultaneously, it trains your eyes to watch for the movement you need to blend with. And then Sen no Sen is that interception. Boy, that window for movement is tiny. You have to move in the right time, or you're kind of screwed. And in fact, practicing that, I think, is probably the best way to prepare your body to move that way. And I've run into issues myself with training and realizing, wow, I'm having trouble hitting that window. And so I have to go back and look at, all right, I'm going to train my footwork. I'm going to work on moving my body, getting my body to move exactly when I need it to. And I've found great success with using like the agility ladder and doing things that get my heels up off the ground, and to be able to move my feet crisply. Because if there's a little bit of sluggishness in there, dragging your feet, sitting on your heels, keeping your legs a little straight or your center a little high, you can't hit that window. Like you're not going to do it.
No. And but you being from a striking background as well, it's much easier for you to see maybe than a lot of Aikido people.
Sure.
That hasn't really cross-trained or really amped up their training in forms of dealing with real attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, some of the things that we do when we train is we train a little bit of striking. You have to be able to strike. We could talk about Atami all day. We talk about Atami all day, but if you don't really know how to throw a decent Atami or a couple punches, what are we really training for?
Yep.
So we do that, and then we do a little open hand slapping, just dealing with blocking and moving in, getting in for a clinch, then maybe moving for a kaitenage or whatever. But it's really, we're training timing, and as a form of sparring, also makes them train to open up for techniques. A couple Atamis, and then you move in, you get your technique or whatever. And I see a lot of, I think that's training like that is what would amp up your Aikido skills a little bit. Just getting into a little bit of live sparring and live situations, and that it kind of like puts a lot of the discussions to the side. A lot of Aikido people, when they see sparring or they see, oh, he's punching or whatever, then that's not Aikido. Well, it's almost impossible to do Aikido without causing anybody harm, without doing some sort of Atami in a real fight or whatever. Like, it's just, realistically speaking, reality looks completely different from from a quote book or the
Sure.
Aikido fantasy world where, you know, everyone's riding a unicorn and we're saluting each other with a beer and everyone's having a good time. And it's really a very naive mind state to be in also, because the world just doesn't work like that. So I'm not saying the way that we train is the best or whatever. I'm just saying that we try and like have stress training, have real timing involved in the training, and some real striking.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny you
And
mentioned
yeah,
that, because I added all of those to my yellow belt test. The very first test that new students take is they have to show me they can do a good, powerful shove to create distance, to be able to do good structured punches and strikes, as well as I called it a one uke randori, where it's basically a live opponent's trying to hit your body, and you move around and cover and use your defense. And if you can do a technique, great. But one of the big separations I noticed, and this is again the I think a byproduct of the paired kata practice, which is Aikido practitioners get used to the idea that every time somebody punches at you, you can do a technique. And that right there is completely false. If you are being attacked by a live attacker, you have to wait for your opportunity for that technique to happen. You're not going to be able to throw it at every moment or at every different punch if somebody's being active. And that could include somebody approaching you with their guard up, like they're going to spar with you or attack you like a real fight, and you did not have the opportunity to close distance and control them already. So now you are kind of like the Osensei quote, even if you have an opponent, now he's admitting that situation is what having an opponent would be.
exactly.
Now he's actively coming after you, and you're trying to read a situation that, if you've done nothing but paired kata practice, it won't look anything like what you've trained. It will look totally alien. And if competition's taught me anything, it's try to train as closely as you can to what you're going to have to experience, as close to live as you can get it, without causing yourself injury, and then you can't train anymore. But the more you get used to what those things look like, and what you describe is perfect in there, of get them used to hands coming at their head and flying at them, and 1, 2s, and 3s, and footwork moving around. All those things are crucial ingredients, I think, to preparing somebody.
Oh yeah, because you won't always have the perfect enemy. You won't always have that perfect enemy. You get control of the back and whatever. Like, I think a lot of Aikido people, they struggle with that range. They just can't close the range, and they get stuck in between, and they're just eating punches.
Right.
If they're dealing with someone who's striking. So to be able to deal with somebody who's striking, or they're about to tackle you, you have to know a little bit about striking and tackling and grappling.
Right.
And so it's just training for that. And like you said, training for the most realistic things that's going to happen in a fight. And when you're fighting, you're training for that. And why don't we bring a little bit of that mentality into Aikido too, without losing the philosophies and all the good stuff with it. It's, you're not really sacrificing any of Morie Ueshiba's quotes by training for modern day life. I think he also said that you have to evolve Aikido with times. He said something like that. But yeah, I mean, just train a little bit realistic, I guess.
Well,
but that's
for people
but even that's relative for people. Like, even Aikido people can discuss that for 3 weeks. Well, they talk about quantum physics and whatever, and they're like, I never end up in a situation because I project energy and it's all peaceful. But that's fine, but if you project that and you live in a quantum physics reality, that's good. We all try and like create our own realities and have a good atmosphere, but shit happens. And also, like, that's just life.
It is. And for those listening, it's easy to think, oh, in order to introduce some reality to my training, I'm going to have to abandon everything and all the other stuff that we normally do. And that's not the case. There is a time and a place for paired kata practice to isolate the technical parts of technique which need to be correct. everybody does. Boxers do this, wrestlers do it. Every competitive martial art sport has its time for studying the intricacies of particular techniques. So you don't give up on that, but that's not everything that you train. You use that to make sure that when you bring in some live training, maybe say 10% of your training time, 5 to 10%, you do some live work. That's where you take all those ingredients and you put them together. And I think that's a necessary part of training. It's not everything. It's not like you show up to an hour and a half or 2 hours of training and all you do is spar and wrestle and get into it. That would be not very productive. But I will say it would be more productive than doing nothing but kata practice if it came to you saving your skin. I think it's much more productive to have a good balance of studying strong technical performance and the live work. You mix them, and that's going to be a winning formula. But you can't do so much live stuff that you exhaust your students and you don't get anything out of them, or go so hard that you injure each other. You're not training, you get zero.
And some people, they always say like, well, if you want to do striking or you want to do grappling, why do you train Aikido? Well, at least I train Aikido because I like the philosophies. I like to be able to control without hurting. It also makes me feel good, and it's also a way of training the self and relieving, stress and tension in the body and all of that stuff. But having that conversation with someone that's never trained Aikido is almost useless, because they're just going to look at you like you're explaining yoga to them or something. But it's but I also believe that you can train Aikido and keep all of that, but at the same time, just have a more modern day attitude towards violence and towards self-defense, which is really good to have. It's good to not be naive on danger out there, because quantum physics is good. You can ignore the negative, sure, but I don't really believe in that either. Doesn't mean it's not there. And I also believe if you just ignore things, you become a little bit ignorant if you don't understand it. That's like true. It's a part of accepting reality for what it is. Doesn't mean you have to be sucked up in the whole bubble of training every day to go out and fight or whatever. It's just being in center and being fully clear that you want to be able to use techniques as well, than just preach spiritual quotes, because you can shove those quotes up your whatever. When it comes down to it, it's just like are we talking about being able to use techniques or not? Can you use it? And that's really what it goes down to. And when I'm working the door, for example, I don't really care what anybody has trained. It's just, if something happened, are they capable of standing there and being loyal in a situation and being able to handle it and just jump into it.
Sure. I like how you describe that. In fact, it sparked a thought in me of, why the question, why do you train Aikido as opposed to a striking art? To me, I guess I just realized when you consider a temi and how integral it is into Aikido, Aikido is a very good combination of striking, throwing, locks, and pins. And basically it's a standing grappling art, if you think about it, as well as traditional Japanese standing jujitsu, things like that. I think it has probably the best combination of applicable skills or applicable tools. And the striking is really meant for control. Like, it sets up the control you have over somebody, as opposed to somebody like a pugilist or a boxer who's so exclusively focused on striking to cause damage. Which I think is really, I don't want to say only possible with gloves and hand protection, but if you're bare knuckled and you hit somebody in a hard place, skull or whatnot, good chance you're going to break your hand, or your knuckles or what have you. So to me, I just from a practical side, and I agree with you, I like the attitude and the I guess the overall philosophy of Aikido, although there's many arguments about what it means. So that's kind of a minefield to go tap dancing into. But just from a practical term, from practical terms, I think Aikido is probably the best fit for civilian self-protection skills and self-defense skills. It's probably more morally defensible than arts that are meant to destroy limbs and bust people up and really hurt them. But I think jujitsu, judo are in a similar boat. Although judo is so focused on ballistic throws and slamming people to the ground, I think that one would be, the earth hits harder than anything else. And I think you throw a solid judo throw on somebody and slam them into the ground, they're probably not going to get back up. So, but I love judo. I love jujitsu. I mean, I love almost all the martial arts. I can't think of one that I really despise, except for some of these fake ones that have been out in the last, those drive me nuts. But I do think Aikido is a great combination for people who are not athletes. And that's another part of martial arts that you can see ones that require a very high athletic ability to perform. And Aikido, yes, you should have a physically capable body. Yes, you should do conditioning and training and those things, because you'll never be disappointed that you were stronger, that you had strength, or you had speed, or you had physicality, fitness. But it's not as though physical strength is a necessary, or athleticism is a necessary component. And therefore that's why I really dig Aikido about all those things.
Yeah, and also we're talking about being aware, and we're talking about being able to read situations. And I think during a lot of these katas and forms, the training of the communication is what probably some of what I appreciate the most about Aikido, especially for work and door work and stuff like that, is being able, when you're training grabs in Aikido, to this superficially speaking, it looks just like a grab, but you're also training communication, and you're training sensing and feeling, and I haven't really gotten that out of a lot of other styles. I love all martial arts, but that's just what makes Aikido special to me. And it really is it's a good tool to have, regardless what work you do. You do business, you have to be able to feel out your business partners. You have to be able to feel, is this the right decision to take? Is it the right people? Whatever. It's a good training, way of training your mind and your senses and your awareness, basically.
Definitely.
So,
there was a discussion in the forum just this last week talking about the paired kata training and whatnot. And I think that one of the things, as you practice with your partner, and I think every Aikidoka should realize this, is that you can do basically dead kata, where the both of you are just doing a walkthrough, motion to motion, and to the point where your mind is bored with it. But you can do that same kata where you give uke, you ask them for, give me some more energy, give me some juice on this attack. So you start to turn it live, and you explore and kind of pressure test as you grow and find the boundaries and limits of technique and how to read that vigorous attack and motion. But it takes a will for the two partners to do that together. And that's not something that comes from the instructor. That comes from how you, the practitioner, take on your own practice. And I think that, having visited many dojos and seminars and things like that, I see a lot of Aikidoka doing dead kata practice. It's kind of just going through the motions. It's like a walkthrough. And I don't find I get much out of that. And I really enjoy when I find an uke or a training partner that's like, okay, let's play with this a little bit. Let's kick it up. Let's figure out where this thing breaks, or where my technique is wrong. I like ukes that can help me find faults in my techniques. And that doesn't mean that I turn them into a raging berserk, but I'll tell them, okay, what I've got right now is working pretty good. Now throw me some variables, like feint me coming in, or as I start to move, adjust, like try to counter this, try to reattack me, or be more active. And and there's some ukes that will respond to that and go, okay, I'll give you that. And others kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? And you can see those people that seem to practice dead kata regularly when they don't even understand what you're asking of them.
Yeah, and those people are usually the guys that want to tell you that everything you do is wrong, and they want to correct every move that you make, and like,
or the statement that Aikido isn't about self-defense. That's to me the crown jewel of kind of that perspective of, well, that's not what we're doing. And like, well, I don't know what you're doing, but that is what I'm doing.
And the Aikido is not for fighting thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I've heard that quite a lot. And some people claim it's for self-defense, but it's not for fighting.
Right.
And they claim to be able to pin somebody down, taking control of them without hurting them.
Mm-hmm.
A violent attacker, you pin him down, you control him. That's Aikido. Well, how in the hell are you supposed to do that if you don't understand the basics of fighting?
Right.
It's not a chance.
And I think a sensei had, if anything, he had a skill that is almost impossible to teach. And this is just my own theory, but I think that he had the ability he understood fighting. He understood how to read an opponent's motion and their intention and aggression, and move and counter in such a way that he was pretty much invulnerable. And I think he proved that in all the challenges that he ever accepted. But how on earth would you ever teach that skill? And I think that he resigned to just merely show how he would move, and his students would largely watch his movements and try to emulate his movements, but they did not really see or comprehend the real magic that was his talent and his extraordinary ability. Now, perhaps because we're in a modern age where we've studied so many different sport competitors and whatnot, and have broken down what makes them really good. What are their skills that make them a superb competitor or martial artist? Maybe nobody had that sophistication of analysis with a sensei and what he did. And he certainly couldn't describe what he did. I mean, at least in a way that was not almost incoherent. But as I read what he has talked about in terms of, like, even in the quote we did, we says, since you win over everything in accordance with the mission of heaven, you possess absolute strength. I'm sure if he, rather than saying that this was something, he was on some sort of mission from heaven, he could say, I knew how somebody was moving. I knew the limitations of what their body motion had, and I would move to where they could not hit me, and I could control them. That would describe possessing absolute strength, wouldn't it? When you can read that and basically make yourself invulnerable and be able to control their body with minimal effort, that would be, I think, an accurate description. Now, I could be wrong, but I do accept that there was something extraordinarily special about Morihei Ueshiba. I think he had some kind of a almost superhuman talent. I'd put him in the Bruce Lee category, Benny the Jet, people like this that were just probably born to be extraordinary martial artists.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that. I agree.
Yeah, and it's the idea that we can copy it just by copying his movement, I think is so far off base, it's not even on the planet. It's out in space somewhere. But to try to understand what makes that, and I think these timings that we're talking about start to open the door of how do we start to find what he was doing and what other very really superb martial artists can do. And I think the timings have a lot to say about that.
Absolutely.
And I think, to add, I guess I wanted to add this fifth timing, which is above that sensen no sen, which is basically you just intercede. You bind somebody up who's obviously being a problem. Now, if you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, I think this is where we find, at least some of the Aikidoka that I've heard from, which is instead of go no sen, which is to respond after the attack, you don't even respond at all. You just get your ass kicked, which is, I think, the worst case scenario. And whether that's because you just vapor locked or you had deer in the headlights, and when you get attacked, you freeze and just get beaten, or you decide actively, well, I'm not going to attack. I'm not going to take action. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to get beaten. Kind of the pacifist response.
Yeah.
And I think personally, that's not my choice, but, I suppose from the story that I told about my drunk friend, I basically challenged him, said, if you want to hit me, you can hit me, but I'm not going to fight. But it was a bluff. If he would have hit me, it would have been on. But just because you say something doesn't mean that's, you make a presentation to try to influence the situation. In that case, it worked. But
well, you're trying to de-escalate it, and you're
right.
trying to save your furniture.
Exactly. And
yeah.
my face, I'm sure we both would have probably been sitting next to each other in the emergency room.
Yeah. And that's not really a good night to go off on. So
no, definitely not where I wanted it to head. So, but I think I've really enjoyed this discussion. Is there anything that you can think of you'd like to add?
Not at this moment. I don't think so.
That's typical. I'll probably think of more stuff in an hour or two after we're done here. Oh, I should have brought this up. But I think these timings, to wrap up where we started this was.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
When talking about Ueshiba's, background and the great guy that he was, and all of his knowledge, it's really hard to transfer that to people training his forms and trying to understand what it is that he understood about the martial arts and Aikido, because it's a question of maturity. Mm-hmm. and maturity is really what you're trying to gain as much growth as possible through training the martial arts and Aikido. And that's really what I look for in another martial artist, is maturity. Like, how much has he understood? How much has he grown, and how much has he experienced? So when it gets to the superficial conversations, I'm not really interested in that. If we want to talk about deep stuff about Aikido and about the martial arts and life, I'm all up for that. But it's always always a question of level of maturity. And you can't teach people maturity. You can gain it with time and experience. And so I try to an interest. Yeah. Definitely.
And I guess I wanted to leave on this point of how these timings actually affect your technique. How many Aikido people practice taking the initiative and wrapping somebody's body up before they actually move? That has a profound effect on just the physical expression of the techniques that we do. And as I started teaching this years ago, to show people show my students rather, that you don't necessarily have to wait for an attack for you to take motion and to take control of somebody's body. And I had a student who was a police officer, and he was on a SWAT team, and he was up doing training, and they had built up this sort of maze of boards that was supposed to represent like a house, but it didn't have a roof on it. So they had a tower where they had judges that would oversee their people going through and clearing the house and doing drills and whatnot. And so he was doing this drill, and he comes around the corner. He had his pistol drawn, and there was a guy there who was bigger, younger, and stronger than he was, blocking the door. And my student, as he approached, he holstered the pistol. They had paint, little paint rounds that they would shoot, but he holstered the pistol and did a tenchinage on this guy, and just totally took him off his feet. Now the guy was standing, he had an aggressive stance, like he was ready to wrestle. And that was kind of the scenario where there suddenly is an attacker. But my student was able to have the mental wherewithal to holster the gun and actually go physical on him, hand to hand, and set him down. In fact, the guy that he took down after he got up, he was looking around and he said, who else did you have? Who else was here that took me down? Because he thought that my student had help with it. But my student came back and told me this, and he's like, wow, that tenchinage works even if somebody's just standing there. Like, that's exactly, and it doesn't require, many of the techniques don't require you to wait for an attack in order to make them work, even though we often train them that way. And so I would invite anybody who thought that these timings are important and is intrigued by this, try working on the techniques that you practice with these different timings to move preemptively and see how it changes things. And one of the techniques that I show all my students that I really love from the bouncing world is when you take the shoulders and you spin somebody around, and you spin them around so they're facing away from you, and then you can do a hikitoshi, or you can wrap them up, or you can do an escort, or there are a lot of different controls you can do from there. But the fact that it's a preemptive motion that doesn't start from a grab, doesn't start from a punch, that is a very handy tool to have. I think it's probably one of the best out there. And I'm sure it's probably something that you've used too, because I got it from bouncers. They love it.
I got a video footage of that spinning the shoulders thing.
Yep.
I actually got footage of that.
Nice.
The guy just goes, he does this thing where he smacks his hands with his fists. He's going, "You want to go? Let's go!" And right when he says that, I spin him around, and I just flip him, put him on his back, and I lock him with my knees.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it works great. And I also tell my students, this is one of the hardest things to simulate when we train in the dojo, which is the lead up of the fist in the hands, or somebody talking, "I'm going to kick your ass. I'm going to pull out I've got a knife. I'm going to slit your throat," or the lead up that happens in the real world that tells you, I am in extreme danger here. I have to, this now time to move. It's now time to act. You need to have partners that are really good actors to do that. And even then it doesn't have the same feel, and it won't. I don't think it can.
You can simulate pretty, a good amount of reality though.
Yeah,
I think you can do that.
But it will feel different when it happens for real. And I think it's so much clearer to know, all right, now it's go time in that real scenario. But it's a good thing to explore. I think it will have a profound effect on how you view technique, to practice it preemptively, at least somewhat, because that is going to be safer for you in the real world, to deal with a problem before it becomes a huge snowball that's rolled halfway down the hill. So, well, thank you, Remy. I appreciate it. This has been a great discussion. Is there any last point you want to get? And then we'll wrap her up.
Thanks for having me on, Tristan. I appreciate it.
You bet. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend.
Likewise. It's all good.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care, man.
Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Stay tuned for more episodes. I've got some great stuff on the way very soon. In the meantime, enjoy your training.